B12 and folate are both members of the water-soluble B vitamin family. They're often grouped together in testing and treatment, specifically in the evaluation of macrocytic anemia. But they're so different. In today's episode of Labstories, we're going to talk all about their differences and help you understand them. It is so easy. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Labstories, where we help you understand your labs and optimize your health. In each episode, we bring a lab to life using stories, clarify the most common abnormalities, teach you what matters, what doesn't, and show you how to move from the red to the black. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Scheck-Snyder. Let's go. All right, let's go indeed. I want to talk all about B12 and folate today, and I really hope this helps you. It is totally my honor to have you here. The first thing I want to go over is the free gift for this episode. So to make this very easy, I've created two infographics, which I'll link in the description. One is comparing Bobby B12 to Frank folate, and the other is my B12 folate and prenatal supplement summary. Total of 2 pages, quick, easy, pictures, infographics. This is going to be something that you can download and reference. So that is the free gift. The item for purchase today, of course, is the written episode. The written episodes are essentially everything in the audio. So all the relevant script, graphics, tables, concepts, all of that stuff that I make into a 4 to 8 page document. I list those for sale for a few dollars. You download it, you learn it today, and then you have it forever. So that will also be linked in the description. Let's stay in touch. Go ahead and subscribe for content if you haven't already, and let's get into it. B12, also known as cobalamin, and B9, also known as folate, are members of the water-soluble B vitamin family. So vitamins as a whole are organic, meaning hydrocarbon-containing compounds that are required in small quantities by organisms for proper metabolic functioning. We have to get vitamins through diet or supplements because we can't produce them ourselves. And unlike iron, which is a raw material that's incorporated into the actual structure of red blood cells, B12 and folate are cofactors, which is another term that I'll quickly define. So cofactors are non-protein chemical compounds or metal ions that are required for an enzyme to function in its role as a catalyst. So cofactors are just enzymatic helpers. And many vitamins function as enzymatic helpers or cofactors, including B9 and B12. Cobalamin and folate are the B12 and B9 vitamin class names. So each lettered vitamin that you know, like A, all the B vitamins, C, D, E, and K, are actually vitamin class names. They have, associated names with them that include many similar compounds within that class, which are called vitamers. And so let's take B12, for example. So cobalamin has 4 vitamers, and those are adenosylcobalamin, cyanocobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, and methylcobalamin. And essentially, those are similar compounds that perform the essential functions of that vitamin class. So folate is a little different. So here's the first difference. So folate is the class name for B9. The active form of folates are the tetrahydrofolates. So those are found naturally in foods, okay? But the inactive form is called folic acid, which is way more searched on the internet. That's the form that's in supplements. That's also the form that's in fortified foods, okay? So we have the vitamin class names, so B12 and B9. Within those vitamin classes are the cobalamins, which are vitamers. Specifically, methylcobalamin and adenosylcobalamin perform functions in the body. And then folate is the class name for vitamin B9, includes inactive folic acid and active tetrahydrofolates in the body. So what do these vitamins do? And this is where they overlap, and I'm going to talk about 2 specific pathways. The first is the conversion of homocysteine to methionine. Okay, so the homocysteine-methionine pathway. And I guess I'll back up and say this is under the umbrella of methylation. So the big things that B12 and B9 or folate do is called methylation. Methyl groups are single carbon groups. And I oversimplify this and say they're like cash money in the body's economy. So everybody needs cash. Every sector of the economy needs cash to function. And when that cash is absent, some sectors of the economy suffer more than others. And so methylation in the body specifically happens like all the time. And it happens in building processes, including DNA synthesis, RNA synthesis, protein synthesis, amino acid metabolism. Methylation happens everywhere. And we hone in when we talk about deficiencies in B12 and B9 in 2 specific areas. The first is in red blood cell production. So red blood cells, they only live 120 days in the body. So there's like literally millions per second that are being recycled or kind of used up as they're older. So there's millions per second that are being, so there's 2 to 3 million per second that are being produced. as well as red blood cells that are older that are being taken out of circulation and broken down. So as a result of that, if you don't have B12 or folate, red blood cell production doesn't come to a standstill, but the bone marrow starts pumping out these really ugly megaloblasts into the blood, and they're not enough, and they also get destroyed sooner once they're in the blood because they're not normal red blood cells. So that's a reflection of methylation gone bad, as well as other fast-dividing cells in the body. So other fast-dividing cells would be cells of mucous membranes, like the mouth. The tongue is involved with that, the intestines. So you'll see, mouth ulcers, diarrhea, intestinal problems. You'll also see problems with developing babies. So that's why folate is important in DNA synthesis in the developing baby, so that the embryo and the fetus, as well as growing kids. So the problems that you'll see with B12 and B9 really deal with DNA synthesis. There's tons of other ones, but those are the ones that are most obvious. And then you'll also see problems in developing kids, pregnant women, and then a third, which is very interesting, is cancers. So obviously cancers are very fast-growing cells, and there's actually anti-folate therapy, which is a mainstay of some cancer treatments. So to summarize what they do, they function in methylation, which is single carbon metabolism. The subgroups under that are really affected are red blood cell production and maturation, and then other fast-dividing cells. So that was B12 and folate. I want to list something that B12 specifically does on its own, and that is that a deficiency in B12 will cause a degradation in myelin. So not all nerves in the body are myelinated or insulated, but a lot of them are. So myelin is a fatty layer that insulates many nerves in the body, and it helps them conduct electricity essentially faster. So if B12 is deficient, there's a breakdown in myelin, and then nerves all over the body essentially short out. So B12 causes separate, specific neurologic problems. This is wide-ranging and variable because nerves are everywhere in the body, so everything is innervated, and the sort of symptom, as it were, will be based on wherever that nerve is that's malfunctioning. So the neurologic problems of B12 deficiency could be personality changes, it could be confusion, tingling of an extremity, muscle weakness, it could be really anything. And I hate to say anything, but it's true. It's very, very difficult to diagnose. So B12 and folate often get shotgunned in the evaluation of lots of neurologic problems, from altered mental status to personality changes and psychiatric problems and everything else. Okay, so this is the part of the episode that's really technical and gets super geeky and horrible, but I want to make this really easy for you. And the reason why I'm even going over the homocysteine to methionine conversion is because this is an integral part of the diagnosis of B12 and folate deficiency. After that, I'm going to go over the methylmalonic acid part of the workup, talk a little bit about diagnosis, and then really pit these guys against one another so we can fully understand. So let's go. All right, so pretend that we're on the playground. B12 and folate are there, as well as their buddy homocysteine. So they're playing a game of pass the methyl group. We can consider this to be, in real life, maybe a ball. Methyl tetrahydrofolate starts out with the ball and passes it to vitamin B12. So methyl tetrahydrofolate passes the methyl group to vitamin B12, making methyl B12 and tetrahydrofolate in the process, right? So we're just passing the methyl group around in a circle. Methyl B12 then passes that methyl group to homocysteine, and homocysteine, by accepting that methyl group, becomes methionine. So there's three players here. Methyl tetrahydrofolate passes the methyl group to B12, making methyl B12 and being converted back into tetrahydrofolate. Methyl B12 then takes that methyl group, gives it to homocysteine, who becomes methionine. If methyl tetrahydrofolate is not there, so if there's a folate deficiency, the game can't even get started, okay? And then you're going to see a buildup in homocysteine because homocysteine is being provided by the body and cannot get converted to methionine. Let's say folate is there, but B12 isn't there. Then folate has no one to pass the methyl group to. So the same thing happens. Homocysteine builds up. So you can see that either folate deficiency or vitamin B12 deficiency here cause a buildup of homocysteine. And it's an association, so it is what it is, but elevated homocysteine levels are associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, all sorts of bad stuff, metabolic disease. So that's the first diagnostic workup. So we're going to check a homocysteine level as well as folate and B12 levels. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So switching gears from folate and B12, we're going to talk specifically about B12 on its own. B12 is a cofactor to the enzyme methylmalonyl-CoA mutase. So I want you to, I guess, just memorize this. This is an intermediate step in amino acid catabolism. This is just another level that you're going to check. So B12 itself, not folate, is a cofactor to methylmalonyl-CoA mutase, which converts the compound methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. And again, these are just metabolic intermediates. So if B12 is absent, methylmalonic acid builds up. So when we're working up folate and B12 deficiency, the first thing we want is, I guess, a CBC, because the biggest manifestation is anemia, specifically macrocytic or large cell anemia, megaloblastic anemia with those ugly megaloblasts. So we want a CBC, a blood smear, B12 and folate levels. We also want homocysteine and methylmalonic acid levels, okay? Let's say you have low folate and low B12 levels. Then maybe it's not obvious, but obviously that's going to be a deficiency. You don't even need methylmalonic acid or homocysteine. If your levels are low, you need to supplement. And I'm going to talk about supplements in a minute. So if your levels are borderline, like 200 to 300 picograms per milliliter for B12 or 2 to 4 nanograms per milliliter for folate, then you have to have the homocysteine and methylmalonic acid levels to help make the diagnosis. And I guess there's 4 scenarios here. If homocysteine is normal and methylmalonic acid is normal, then there's no deficiency. If homocysteine is normal and methylmalonic acid is elevated, then you have a B12 deficiency and no folate deficiency. If homocysteine is elevated but methylmalonic acid is normal, then you have a folate deficiency. Do you see what we're doing here? So we're really contrasting homocysteine with methylmalonic acid. If homocysteine is elevated and methylmalonic acid is elevated, then you definitely have a B12 deficiency, but you may also have a folate deficiency. You would refer back to the folate level at this point. So if homocysteine is elevated, that could either be folate or B12. But if MMA is also elevated, then you definitely have a B12 deficiency, and you essentially should supplement with both. Again, this chart is much easier to look at than to listen to on a podcast, especially when I'm talking a million miles a minute. So it's in the written episode. I'll also put it in the YouTube video, which you can go and find. I've done short topical videos, and these have tons of graphics in them as well. Now that we've covered the workup, let's go ahead and talk about how you get these vitamins, how they're absorbed, how you supplement, and how they're different, and make this really easy to understand. So very, very, very cool. So folate actually is derived from the Latin word for foliage. So folate is found in high amounts in greens. So you have tons of folate in leafy greens, in cruciferous vegetables. And so since it's very low on the food chain, animals eat plants that contain folate. And so folate is also present in smaller amounts in animal products. It's not as much, but folate is definitely in basically all foods. And on top of that, the US government has mandated fortification of grains with folate since 1998. So we have meat, vegetables, fortified foods, it's in milk, it's in eggs. Folate is literally in like all foods. So that's important because if somebody has a folate deficiency, that's almost an amazing achievement. It's very, very hard to do, except if you're truly eating an insufficient diet. And there's really only a few groups of humans that are left doing that. Number one is the elderly who are not eating anything. Number two is people who drink alcohol heavily that really have insufficient diets. And then there are a few groups of malabsorptive people, so people with really bad inflammatory bowel disease. And there are also folks that take valproic acid, which is an anti-epileptic and anti-seizure medication, can malabsorb folate. But in sum, folate is in all foods. It is very easy to absorb. Okay, let's contrast that to B12. B12 is made by bacteria, and humans ingest B12 by eating animals that have B12 in their bodies. So the coolest example of that is cows. Cows have bacteria in their guts that make B12, and then they store it in their muscles and organs. They secrete it in milk. Plants do not make B12. They just don't. They don't have bacteria inside of them that make B12. So if you're truly a vegan, this is where you need to supplement. And I'll be honest, it's very easy to get the recommended dietary allowance of B12 by supplementing. The RDA is very small. It's only 2.4 micrograms. And the supplements, which we'll talk about in a minute, are huge doses. They're very much larger than that. So it's very easy to get enough B12 if you're a vegan. But let's contrast this to folate. So B12 is only in animal products, and it's not easy to absorb. B12 is very, very difficult to absorb. It requires 3 chaperone proteins, which are haptocorin in the saliva, intrinsic factor that's secreted by the stomach, and then transcobalamin, which shepherds the proteins essentially the rest of the way through the blood and whatnot. It also requires an essentially perfect gastrointestinal environment. So B12 deficiencies, if you're not a vegan, and you eat B12, because most people are not vegans and they get enough B12. B12 deficiencies are almost always an absorption problem. Just remember that. Folate is easily absorbed, and deficiencies in folate are a dietary problem. B12 deficiencies are absorption problems. And I guess now I'll rope in the most important group with folate deficiency, which is pregnant women or women that are planning to become pregnant. So this is really who most of the supplements are targeted toward appropriately and who really need to supplement. So I have two groups of people that should supplement for folate. The prophylactic group are pregnant women. All right, so now that we've talked about absorption, let's talk about deficiencies. Deficiencies of B12 take years to develop. And the reason for that is because most B12 in our body has what's called enterohepatic circulation. So entero meaning intestines, hepatic meaning liver. The liver secrete, and a lot of compounds do this in the body, by the way. The liver secretes B12 into the intestines, and then it goes down the intestines and mostly gets reabsorbed. It's just this secretion reabsorption pathway or excretion reabsorption pathway that occurs over and over. Folate, on the other hand, does not have enterohepatic reabsorption. So deficiency can develop over a number of months. B12 deficiency develops over years. Folate deficiency develops over months. We already talked, but I'm going to recap. B12 has separate neurologic symptoms in addition to anemia. Folate, on the other hand, does not have neurologic symptoms. It only has anemia symptoms and those other DNA replication symptoms that I referenced earlier. All right, let's talk a little bit about replacement, and this is based, at least hypothetically, on how these vitamins are absorbed. Since most B12 deficiency is an absorption problem, the replacement must bypass the defective absorption, at least in theory. So B12 injections, for that reason, are the classic treatment for B12 deficiency, because if you give somebody a shot, it goes directly into their blood and bypasses the intestines. The closest thing to that without a prescription would be sublingual tablets, so the ones that dissolve under the tongue, and those hypothetically are better than pills, even though this hasn't really borne out in research, but you essentially put it under your tongue and it's absorbed directly into the blood from there. The other option, and the one that is most practical and most widespread, would be these mega doses of pills. And I say mega doses because they're literally mega doses. You require 2.4 micrograms per day of B12. The average supplement is 1,000 to 2,000 micrograms, so between 400 and 800x what our daily requirement is. And I didn't mention this earlier, but in addition to the very complex active absorption of B12, there is a passive absorption mechanism as well. I guess it's not really a mechanism. It's essentially just taking these mega doses of B12 that smash their way through the intestines into the blood without needing the chaperone proteins. So if you take enough B12, 1 to 2,000 micrograms per day, that's enough to replete vitamin B12 deficiency, even though you're still taking it orally. In contrast to B12, folate is super easy to absorb, super easy to replace. Have you ever heard of folate shots? No, you haven't, because they don't exist. At least they shouldn't exist. I'd even argue one step further that in most cases, folate supplements are pretty useless because, as I mentioned earlier, it's in almost all foods. B12 deficiency is often lifelong. It's an absolute deficiency. It's specifically in people with absorption problems, which are inflammatory bowel diseases, often lifetime illnesses. People that have had gastric bypass surgery, so something that you can't undo. These are often lifelong deficits or absolute deficits. Folate, on the other hand, is a temporary deficit. It's a relative deficit in a time of increased need. And here's the group that needs it the most: women that are planning to become pregnant or are pregnant. So DNA synthesis increases in pregnancy, right? The embryo and the fetus is developing. The folate need increases. It increases about 50% according to the recommended dietary allowance increase from 400 micrograms to 600 micrograms daily. So that's a temporary thing. It doesn't last forever. And then the other groups of people that are going to be at risk of folate deficiency, so people that drink alcohol heavily, that's potentially a changeable thing, a reversible thing. And then the elderly, that might be a little bit more long-term. But B12 is absolute lifelong deficit. Folate is temporary and a relative deficit. To recap the dosages of the supplements. So B12, those are going to be 1 to 2,000 micrograms daily. And in folate is going to be 400 to 1,000 micrograms daily. So in pregnant women or women that are pregnant that are planning to become pregnant, they need to take, according to the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, a 400 microgram supplement at least per day. And it's just kind of funny. I'll tell you how this works. So you eat a healthy diet, a high folate diet, meat and vegetables. It still can be difficult to meet the recommended dietary allowance just through diet. So that's 600 micrograms daily for pregnant women. ACOG recommends at least a 400 microgram supplement, but The maximum safe daily dose is 1,000 micrograms. So for that reason, supplements marketed toward pregnant women, folate supplements, are going to be between 400 and 1,000 micrograms, almost all of them. For people that are actually folate deficient, so remember, we're not checking folate levels in pregnant women. We're just getting ready. We're preparing to supplement to prevent neural tube defects like spina bifida. That's why we do it in the first place. We're not checking levels, but for people that are deficient, by the level, the replacement dose is 1 to 5 milligrams or 1,000 to 5,000 micrograms daily. And we're gonna supplement in both cases B12 and folate for as long as we expect to be deficient. So I've put 3 good supplements essentially for each category in the description. And these meet my criteria of being affordable, available, and clean. And the companies that I sort of keep coming back to over and over, even though I have no relationship with them, are Nature's Bounty, Nature Made, Thorne, and Pure Encapsulations. Different price points, but these are really good supplement companies. These are affiliate links, so I'll receive a small commission if you buy one through my link, and I'd really appreciate that. But as far as the folate supplements, I have good ones for pregnancy, I have good ones for folate replacement, and then I have one option that works for both. The last thing I'll say is a concept of DFE, or dietary folate equivalents. So on the back of the supplement bottles for folate, you'll see those letters, DFE. It's interesting, and this makes me cringe, but supplements give you more bang for your buck of folic acid than folate, which is wrapped up in foods. So you absorb supplements better. And so what you'll see is the conversion is 0.6 micrograms of folic acid from a supplement equals 1 microgram of tetrahydrofolate from a food. So that is what DFE means. In summary, B9 and B12 are both members of the water-soluble B vitamin family. They overlap in the homocysteine to methionine conversion, but B12 has a separate cofactor assignment to helping the enzyme methylmalonyl-CoA mutase convert methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. You can work it up with a CBC, a blood smear, homocysteine levels, methylmalonic acid levels. The repletion is with varying oral doses. The foods that they're in are different, and pregnant women especially need to take folate supplements. Here's to understanding your labs and optimizing your health.